economics. I have been assisting the Energy Bureau with the energy efficiency and demand response docket, NEPR-MI-2022-0001. This is a stakeholder technical workshop in that docket regarding the baseline and potential studies conducted by the Energy Bureau's consultant, NV5. The dominant part of this meeting will be a presentation by the lead on that project from NV5. This workshop is being recorded, streamed, and simultaneously translated on YouTube. So for those who couldn't make it today, or for your own reference, I forget whether there's other front matter I'm supposed to do at this point. I'm sure we can come back around to it. I think in the interest of knowing who all is here, it makes sense to just do a quick run around to make sure that we all understand which stakeholders are here in the room virtually, and then the rest of the agenda is basically Matthew Sachs from NV5 will give a presentation about the studies. And the real purpose of today is to make sure that that you all have a good chance to really dig in and understand those studies. If you have particular comments or opinions about those studies, the primary venue for making sure those comments are fully received is to put them in written comments, which are due in a few weeks. So primarily, we recognize that folks who had RSVP'd to this workshop got a copy of the studies yesterday. You may not have had time to digest them in their entirety, and that's okay because Matthew's going to walk us through them. If you didn't get that email, they are posted in the relevant docket on the Energy Bureau's website as well. So with that, let's do a quick round of introductions. I'll go by organization, and then for the folks who I know and expect to be here, and then we'll make sure we catch everybody else who's here as well. So why don't we do anybody who's here from LUMA first?
Graziella Siciliano, Director of Energy Transformation.
Morning, Juan Carlos Patiño, Director of Customer Energy Programs.
Good morning, Gonzalo Nez, Vice President of Regulatory.
Good morning, everyone. Joanny Salcedo, Manager, Compliance Portfolio Manager.
Good morning, everyone. Laura Rosas, I'm Council.
Hi, it's Todd Williams, Director with Guidehouse, and we're helping LUMA with the EE and DR plan.
Anybody else from LUMA or its consultants? All right. Anyone here from PREPA? Or Genera? From the Consumer Protection Office, is there anyone here from OEPC? Right. I see folks from CESA. So folks from CESA want to introduce yourselves.
Good morning, Javier from CESA, listening in. Thanks.
This is PJ Wilson from CESA as well. Brief explainer, we're the Solar and Energy Storage Association. We focus on efficiency, but we're here because of the intersection with these efficiency programs and how they can be compatible with the deployment of distributed solar and storage on the island. Thanks.
Right. Thank you. Right. I don't think we've heard from everybody, so I would open the floor for a bit of a free-for-all for a moment to let folks who have not introduced themselves introduce themselves, if you like. Please, your name and affiliation.
Hi, good morning. This is Nicole Sage with Resource Innovations. We're partnered with Scott Madden contracted with LUMA to deliver the energy efficiency programs. And accompanied here is my team, Linda Oliva, Viviana Alafortunya, Luis Fernandez Ramos, and Carolina Colon. And interesting stuff we've got here today. All we're excited to hear the updates. Appreciate it.
And then Morgan Shattuck, a director with Scott Madden. As you heard Nicole say, we're part of the implementation team with LUMA's programs.
Hi, I'm Sean Malone. I'm with Solar United Neighbors. I'm the distributed power plant technical analyst. Here for the same reasons as CESA, with an interest in the virtual power plant there, distributed solar.
Thank you. Anybody else? Right. I also mention my colleague Kenji Takahashi, also staff, is here as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Matt Sachs, who did not introduce himself yet because he can do so now, and he can take us through a summary of the various studies that they've completed for the Energy Bureau.
Great. Thanks, Asa, and thanks for the introduction of this project. Thank you all for coming, and thanks for the opportunity to present the results of the Puerto Rico baseline and market potential study. Quick introduction for me. My name is Matt Sachs. I have been with NV5 and before that Optimal Energy for nearly 20 years, and in that time have contributed to and led probably nearly a dozen potential studies for clients throughout North America. Let me get this going here. So I've pulled together a presentation today which includes a lot of content from the full breadth of the study. Some aspects of this work have been subject of previous technical conferences, so I'm not intending to spend too much time going over, for instance, the baseline study findings. I was planning to hit on some high points or dwell on the methodology too much, except again going over those high points. But I think we have plenty of time to return to anything that folks are interested in once I get through the main content, which will be the results of the market potential study. Just a few notes on the agenda for today. I'll quickly introduce the purpose of the study, which you probably all know. Then move into a high-level overview of some of the key findings from the baseline study. Next, I will describe our methodology and the results of our assessment of contributing entities and what that means. And then finally, move on to the market potential analysis results and close out with some conclusions and recommendations. So starting out, just to give a brief overview of this project, the purpose was to provide a general understanding of the type and efficiency of existing energy using equipment. We were also trying to help understand market practices, not only in the existing building stock, but also in new construction and standard practice for new equipment purchases. There is, as I'm sure you know, somewhat of a lack of detailed information on the building stock in Puerto Rico. It's the island's not covered by some of the products of DOE, namely the Residential Energy Consumption Survey and the corresponding commercial and manufacturing surveys. So this was a great opportunity to build up some more knowledge. As we'll talk about in the scope of the baseline study, there's some limitations to this study in terms of the number of surveys and site visits and what could be determined for all building types. But it's certainly an improvement, versus where we started. We're also trying to estimate the magnitude of the energy efficiency opportunity under a variety of different market assumptions to help inform potential future programs, budgets, and goals. And finally, we're hoping to be able to provide a better understanding of where the key opportunities lie to help guide that future program design. So starting out with the baseline study, as I said, I'll probably plan to quickly move through some of this stuff. But the baseline study included primary data collection across all three sectors: residential, commercial, and industrial. The residential sector included a combination of phone surveys as well as site visits. I phrased this as the original study scope for the baseline study. This was a bit fluid over the study horizon for reasons I'll get into in a few minutes. But these were the initial targets for some of these things, for some of the surveys and site visit completes. We also targeted 5 to 7 in-depth interviews, or IDIs, with various market actors like wholesalers and distributors and contractors. In the commercial sector, we primarily focused on the 2 market segments estimated to have the highest overall energy use in the commercial sector. These were primarily conducted through site visits, identified through brief telephone screeners to identify those sites. And here too, we targeted 5 to 7 in-depth interviews. On the industrial sector, it had, it's phrased, a lower emphasis, not necessarily a lower emphasis, but some understanding of our limitations here, given that it's a very heterogeneous market, and it's very difficult to form a comprehensive estimate of that market, and we did not have the budget to do so, but wanted to provide some insights into this sector, and tried to do that by conducting 5 site visits. While at this level, they're still largely qualitative in their findings, but as I'll discuss in a little more detail later, they were at least illustrative in confirming some of our overarching assumptions about this sector. And as an outcome of the baseline study, we were trying to quantify typical sizes and efficiencies of equipment across key end uses, as well as disaggregate that energy use by building type and end use. I'm going to skip ahead here. This is a little content about our sample sizes. I will just note that, as I mentioned, we did not achieve the original number of survey and site visit completes, either across residential and commercial. There was a change in our approach midway through the project. That was namely the removal of incentives for survey and site visit participants, which proved to be difficult to overcome and keep up response rates. So we navigated this through the project, and once we had an understanding of the impact on response rates, developed a revised estimate of targeted completes, and we were able to meet those revised targets. On commercial, just briefly, we primarily targeted offices and retail establishments. in both the residential and the commercial sectors, we stratified our survey design to achieve minimum completes across small, medium, and large building types. And residential, it was stratified by geographic region and income level. Moving on to some of the high-level findings from the baseline study. Probably a lot of this isn't news to you necessarily, but construction for residential buildings is mostly concrete, including walls and roofs, either block or poured concrete. Insulation is pretty uncommon. Walls were almost always uninsulated. Roofs, less than 25% had some insulation. And if you see these keys throughout the slides, just to let you know, the RSV means these are based on the site visit data, whereas the SVY means it's a takeaway from the surveys, and then the IDIs are from the in-depth interviews with market actors. Just going to jump ahead here. In terms of heating and cooling equipment, a mix of cooling strategies were found across income levels. There were, most residences used some form of air conditioning. 75% did so, and that air conditioning includes both mechanical cooling as well as fans. We found that air conditioning was slightly less common in low-income households, at 53% versus 82% for non-low income. And central AC systems, like wall insulation, were exceedingly rare. Ductwork is not common, and only 10% of households reported having a central system. And finally, heating is very rare. Only 3% of homes reported using any type of space heating, primarily through space heaters. In terms of usage of air conditioning, most respondents, 70%, said they used the AC almost year-round, 10 to 12 months a year. And the majority also said they use it less than 12 hours on a typical day. Only 27% of households cool more than 90% of their home's area. This was a bit of a tricky thing to model as part of the study, especially where things like envelope measures like cool roofs were concerned, where you have a portion of a building or a home cooled, but are thinking about a whole building treatment for reducing space conditioning needs. And a common strategy on this front is just to cool bedrooms. Moving on to lighting, LEDs were the most common lighting type in the residential sector. These values in the figure on the right here are in terms of lamp or fixture counts, not energy consumption. So there's 77% of lamps or fixtures that are already using LED technology. The remaining 23% are split mostly between CFLs and incandescents. We didn't find a significant variation in lighting types by income level or ownership. And I think one thing that was interesting is, it doesn't appear that Puerto Rico's lighting market, particularly on the residential side, is behind the states. For instance, if you look at saturations in the recent 2020 U.S. lighting market characterization study, these are pretty in line with those, and similarly on the CNI side, which we'll get to in a minute. In terms of water heating, there were a variety of system types identified through the baseline study. Tankless inline and solar water heating were all popular options. Among all of the households, 43% have inline showers or tankless water heaters, and only 22% have standalone tank heaters. And again, this is an interesting finding because, inline showers or tankless water heaters, they're typically used for a specific application. So their presence is almost a barrier for using a more centralized system, such as a solar hot water heater or a heat pump hot water heater. Low-income households were found to use less hot water than market rate homes. 15% of low-income households responded that they did not have hot water, compared to 8% for non-low-income households. Solar hot water was less common in low-income households. And this, too, was a little surprising, given historical focus of the Weatherization Assistance Program to install solar hot water systems for low-income households. But we found that only 7% had some type of solar hot water system. Moving on to water heating fuels. Among all households, 65% use electricity as their primary water heating fuel. Even in homes with solar hot water, they may use secondary water heating, either fueled by electricity or propane. Propane was by far the smallest fraction of the water heating fuels across all households at 4%. But it was more common where homes had a tankless water heater. Moving on to appliances, I might just jump ahead here to this highlighted finding here that secondary fridges might represent a sizable savings opportunity. If you see this chart here, sorry, it's a little confusing, but the y-axis is the percent of respondents, and this is showing you the number of appliances per home, and you could see that between 20 and 25% of respondents said that they have a secondary refrigerator, and most secondary refrigerators were over 10 years old. That's pretty consistent with other estimates we've seen on that front, where the older fridge gets put out in the the garage or the mud room or whatever, and is used intermittently. Also, freezers, while smaller, a fair number of homes, nearly 5% claimed they had secondary freezers, which was somewhat surprising. A quick recap of energy efficiency actions that respondents had taken. By far, the highest action was installing LEDs. 68% of households claim they've installed LEDs, and this was consistent with what we found through the survey and site visits. Second on the list was buying energy efficient air conditioning. And I will note that this was, self-reported. So, there might be a little uncertainty about what qualifies as efficient. So just to take this with a slight grain of salt, but 43% claimed that they had bought an inefficient air conditioner. And these are all actions within the last 5 years. We found that energy efficiency was more commonly undertaken among non-low-income respondents and single-family owners. Low-income and multifamily respondents were the least likely to report efficiency actions. 25% had said they had done nothing on the list of options. Moving on to some highlights from the commercial sector. I'll jump right into envelope findings. Similar to the residential sector, we found that concrete or concrete block wall construction was by far the most common in commercial. Flat roofs were common, and wall and roof insulation were not common at all in retail buildings. Office buildings showed slightly more insulation via the site visits. 9% claimed or 9% were found to have insulation in the walls. And I think more than half of the healthcare outpatient buildings didn't have any insulation in walls or roofs. A little more on building envelope. Office buildings had more double pane windows than other building types assessed. A little more than 50% of establishments had double pane windows. In contrast to retail establishments, which were predominated by single pane. Healthcare outpatient facilities were somewhere in the middle, around just shy of 70% using single pane windows. Interior lighting, as I mentioned earlier, interior lighting was already predominantly LEDs. 95% of establishments were using LEDs as their primary lighting type. Retail slightly less, but still significant at almost 75%, and then healthcare outpatient at just under 70%. So while there's certainly a lot of LEDs already out there in the market, there's still some opportunities that exist, and as we'll see in the potential for pursuing savings in this market and end use. In terms of interior lighting controls, automatic controls were very uncommon across both offices and retail establishments. About 10% of office establishments were found to use some type of automated control, primarily occupancy sensors. These were a bit more common in healthcare facilities at over 50%. But this lack of automated controls, it presents an opportunity for advanced controls in the future, and particularly those enabled by things like luminaire level lighting controls. Exterior lighting was significantly behind interior lighting based on the site visit data. Offices were found to have only about 20% using LEDs as their primary exterior lighting type. and retail lower still at about 14%. Healthcare outpatient facilities were more consistent with the findings on interior lighting, with them using LEDs in 70% of their applications. Exterior lighting controls, where these controls exist, they're dominated by either photocell controls or a combination of photocells with time clocks or motion sensors. Manual switches are still fairly common for exterior lighting, especially in the retail segment. Moving on to cooling systems. Across the site visits conducted, mini splits were the most common type of cooling system. In offices, they were just shy of 20% of establishments having them. In retail, much more common at 75%, and then about 20% for healthcare. Medium-sized offices and retail and healthcare establishments were more likely to have centralized systems using DX cooling, either through a constant volume air handling unit or a rooftop unit. Large offices and large outpatient facilities were more likely to use larger systems such as chillers. And moving on to water heating, one interesting finding was that most of the establishments visited didn't have any type of water heating, and where it did exist, electric resistance water heaters were typically used. And where we did find it, we found that demand recirculation controls were I think rarely present, but I don't think we saw any. This is just an input from our project partner IBTS. We didn't see it in the site visit data specifically, but they reported that typically large hotels and healthcare inpatient facilities often use propane for water heating, given the volume of needs there. Moving on to appliances and plug loads, most offices only have, I guess most of the building types visited only have residential style refrigerators. Dishwashers were not common at all. Half of office and retail owners, and more than that, nearly 80% responded that they purchase Energy Star equipment when available. Advanced power strips for plug load management were not common. And half of those surveyed said that they enabled server room power management systems. And where we found them, EV chargers generally didn't have any time of use controls, although they were very, very rare in the site visit data. I also wanted to touch on one additional major piece of the baseline study, and that is the sales disaggregation. So again, with project partners Slipstream and IBTS, we developed a number of building energy simulation models informed with findings from the primary data collection. So we use that data as well as some secondary sources where the scope of the study didn't include primary data collection for those non-covered building types. we used building energy simulation models to disaggregate the end-use energy consumption. So it was a combination of using census data to identify building counts, which we then building counts by primary building activity, which we then married with typical size estimates by number of employees to break out the overall floor space of the non-residential building stock. And with that and the use of the building energy simulation models, we were able to develop this disaggregation of energy consumption by building type and end use. So if you're not familiar with these diagrams, this is a Sankey diagram. So on the left here is showing all of the various building types considered in the study and in the subsequent potential analysis. And on the right, it's showing the end uses, how that energy is used. So you can kind of trace from a given building to an end use and not only see how buildings are using energy, but how that all sums up at the end use level across all energy consumption. So I think a couple of things jump out immediately is that space cooling is dominant. Nearly 40% of the electric energy consumption was found to be consumed by mechanical space cooling. Another primary finding here is that water heating is very low at only 3.5% of the modeled energy consumption. And this is perhaps not extremely surprising on the commercial side, where hot water use among most building types tends to be pretty low as a share of building level energy consumption. But this is lower than expected in terms of overall energy consumption across all sectors. Moving on to the second component of this study, in addition to the
Matt, it might be just for the purposes of having people not forget their questions.
Sure.
It might be worth it, at least to give people opportunity to ask clarifying questions about the baseline study part at this time, if you have them, and then we can move on to the other pieces.
Sure. Thanks for the suggestion. I was just powering through here. Apologies for not pausing earlier.
If folks do have questions, there's obviously a lot more detail in the study report itself, and I'm sure that we could address follow-up questions if they come in after the time. I just wanted to make sure that the folks were following, and we're going to lose people before we went on to the other parts. So, all right, I guess if there are questions, I'll give you one more chance to speak up, and then we'll let Matt continue. Okay, all right. Go ahead, Matt.
Great, thanks. And I will just mention there are, as Asa mentioned, there's the full report available for review, including all of the survey instruments, site collection data forms, in-depth interview guides, as well as more detailed findings. And I think, I don't know if it's problematic, but we can certainly distribute this slide deck after the call. And there's a number of appendices slides that provide more summarized findings from the baseline study. So moving on to the second primary component of this analysis, we were tasked with developing an assessment of so-called contributing entities. And as the energy efficiency regulations allow, the 30% reduction target by 2040 can be satisfied a number of ways. So in addition to utility administered and implemented programs, a number of other things are envisioned to contribute to those targets. So part of our overall scope was to identify any existing data sources to inform what those contributions might look like, both historically and forward-looking. And the contributing entities kind of outlined in the regulations are, as I said, in addition to utility administered energy efficiency programs and actions in government buildings, savings from the adoption of new building energy codes implemented after 2019, or increased compliance with building energy codes, savings from incremental federal or Commonwealth appliance energy efficiency standards. And again, here too, these were limited to those implemented after 2019. And then finally, energy efficiency in non-governmental buildings facilitated through funding from federal or Commonwealth funds. And these include the federal weatherization assistance program, community development block grants, and the state state energy program, among others. And the purpose of this was to help essentially identify the gap when you take all of these contributing entities into account. Essentially, what would be left to be, either administered by LUMA's energy efficiency programs or from other as yet unidentified contributing entities. So I'll run through those one by one, kind of giving a high-level overview of our methods as well as the findings. I will note, because I don't have a slide for it, we were unable to find any documented savings from any government mandates for energy efficiency. There had been some passed in legislation with specific targets that were then modified to essentially align with the overall 30% by 2040 requirement. But there weren't specific requirements established to our knowledge beyond that. So while there, may be some activity there, we were unable to identify any, any documentation specifically conducted to satisfy those, those government facility requirements. So the first one of these components that we did quantify were impacts from building energy codes. So we did this by assuming there would be periodic code adoption in Puerto Rico, covering both the residential and commercial sectors. We also assumed some increasing compliance over time, as well as coupling this with new construction rates to estimate an overall impact. So we essentially took research conducted periodically by the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory on each of the model codes, specifically the International Efficiency Conservation Code, or IECC, P&L after finalization of a new version of IECC, develops an estimate of the savings relative to previous codes. And while they don't specifically do this for Puerto Rico, they do provide estimates by climate zone, and those climate zones assume building construction that's pretty well aligned with practices in Puerto Rico. So using the appropriate climate zone data, we are able to estimate the percent site EUI reduction relative to the previous code. And looking over the last 4 code versions, we're able to identify the average version to version reduction in site energy use intensity. So for the residential sector, we found that averaged out to be about 4.9%. And on commercial, it was about 10.5%. So next, we needed to have an estimate of building energy code compliance over time, because building energy codes are great, but they only actually have impact if there's successful enforcement. So we needed to incorporate compliance estimates so we weren't overstating the impacts of building energy codes. And to do this, we again relied on some recent studies on code adoption and impacts of code conducted by PNNL. And they essentially created these, a curve that essentially starts out at 50%, and then in the case of commercial, and then increases with each year that a given code cycle is effective, and then essentially assuming once the next code is passed, compliance drops again as the market gets familiar with it and adoption increases over time. So we assumed that the IECC 2018, the current code, would remain in place through 2024. So that's why we see compliance estimates continue to rise relative to the successive code versions. So, while we assume this is in place for 6 years, the subsequent codes we assume are updated every 3 years. So, RES starts out at 50% for each of those cycles and gets up to over 65% compliance. That's commercial. Residential starts at 80% and rising to above 90% in the 3rd year of the code cycle. So using those assumptions as well as estimated new construction activity, we estimated that savings, incremental savings kind of increase gradually over time, and because these are again relative to the 2019 baseline year, and by the end of the analysis period, which was 2040, cumulative annual savings across both residential and commercial represented a combined 1.8% of FY 2019 sales. And if I didn't mention it earlier, that 2019 year is the baseline year against which that 30% requirement by 2040 is going to be measured. Moving on to federal appliance standards, our analysis assumed that any federal appliance standards with compliance dates after June 30th, 2019 were eligible as a contributing entity. And that compliance date is important because in the whole federal rulemaking process, there's a number of key dates. There's the date that a standard gets published in the Federal Register. There's a date that standard becomes, quote unquote, effective. And then there are the associated compliance dates after which, depending on the standard, equipment needs to be, equipment either imported or manufactured in the U.S. needs to be exceed the standard. Our analysis considered 32 discrete product categories that had standards hitting in this time frame. We didn't necessarily quantify the impacts of all of them. This table on the right here is just an excerpt of the full list you can find in the report. But some of these standards, particularly those for space heating equipment, weren't very relevant to our analysis. Some of them were published beyond our cutoff date for consideration of the standards in the analysis, and most of those were subsequently rescinded, so they wouldn't have impacted the numbers anyway. And to quantify the impacts of these standards, we generally relied on the national impact analyses conducted by the DOE as part of these rulemaking processes. So, for each rulemaking, unless there are some special considerations, the DOE needs to determine whether a given new standard is technologically feasible and economically justified. And part of the way they establish that is through conducting these national impact analyses to quantify the overall energy efficient or energy savings associated with the standard. And there are some minimum requirements that the standard needs to meet in order to meet those definitions. So these estimates are typically at the national level. That if there is some type of regionalization in the standard itself, there might be some regional analysis, but by and large, they're national impact analyses, as the name suggests. So we took these numbers and scaled them to Puerto Rico's market, using what we thought were the most appropriate scaling factors, depending on the product. So while some of them might be scaled on, total commercial sector electric energy sales, others might be scaled based on our best estimate of total number of swimming pools in the States versus in Puerto Rico. This very busy chart shows the impacts of each of the standards. I'll point out that the dotted line here in blue is plotted on a secondary axis on the right here. This only applies to that product, which is residential, well, not necessarily residential, but general service lamps, which covers the majority of common, screw-in lamps. That has a very a big impact compared to any of these other individual standards. So that's why we plotted it here, so you could actually see the impacts of these other standards. GSLs had a cumulative savings impact of over 600 gigawatt hours by 2040. Next highest on the list were standards for residential refrigerators and freezers at around 135 gigawatt hours, and then beyond that, water heaters, residential ACs and heat pumps, and clothes dryers are the next biggest savers. moving on to, and I'll have a roll up of what the overall combined impacts of the standards are in a moment. Moving on to non-government buildings, we reviewed a lot of federal and Commonwealth sources of funding, but ultimately limited this analysis to the federal weatherization assistance programs and the state energy program. While there are numerous block grants out there, our research found that most of those were concerned with distributed energy resources and resilience upgrades, and not necessarily energy efficiency, or at least weren't reporting energy efficiency in a way that was useful for this analysis. So we limited this assessment to WAP and SEP. And to estimate the impacts, both the historical and future impacts of the Weatherization Assistance Program, we first developed estimates of the savings per dollar invested. And we did this by leveraging some recent reports on the Weatherization Assistance Program in Puerto Rico, but also leveraging slightly dated, but the national impact analysis of the Weatherization Assistance Program, and specifically the addendum that was specific to U.S. territories. And through that, we developed an estimate of energy savings per dollar invested. So with that and projections of the budgets, we could estimate the savings impacts over the entire analysis period. So we look through Puerto Rico's budget allocations, through the historical period of 2020 through 2025, and used the average of those 6 years to project that forward from 2026 onward through the remainder of the analysis period. In addition to that, we also included the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act Weatherization Assistance Program funding, formerly known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And there we assumed that the allocation for Puerto Rico would be spread out evenly over the years 2025 through 2029. And that represents a sizable budget, more than 4 times the standard allocation, annual allocation. So we assumed that was spent by 2029, and then beyond that, 2030 to 2040, it was just the standard annual WAP allocation. So this chart shows the incremental annual savings and the cumulative annual savings estimated from both WAP and the State Energy Program. We limited our assessment from savings from the State Energy Program to reported savings. We don't have any certainty that there's going to be additional funds there. So we just modeled what has been claimed to date with an assumed measure life. So if you look at these dark blue lines in the figure, you'll see that the incremental savings that we could identify were essentially assumed to be constant over 5 years, and then not continuing in the future. So we see the cumulative annual savings rise as a result of that before flattening out and then falling off as we assume that those measure savings expire. On the Weatherization Assistance Program front, we modeled or estimated savings from the 2020 through 2024 period. In 2025 is when we see the impacts of those increased budgets take effect. before stopping after 2029 when the incremental annual savings kind of drop to lower levels again with that reduced budget. In total, these contribute 0.4% to the 2040 target, or 0.4% of the 30%, I should say. So what does it look like when we roll all of these components up? This figure here, this stacked area chart kind of shows the three components that we just talked about. The federal standards, federal appliance standards is the big blue shaded portion here. The orange shaded portion is energy codes, and the almost imperceptible gray band here is from the non-government buildings, namely Weatherization Assistance Program and the State Energy Program. So you can see that these savings are dominated by federal standards. A major part of that, as we mentioned, is the standards for general service lamps. These are impactful because they, impact every single piece of equipment purchased. So it's like, an efficiency program, but everybody has to participate. So these do amount to a considerable portion of the overall target by 2040. When these three components are taken together, it represents 10.6% of that 30% target. So just about a third. And moving, and I'll take Ace's tip here and pause for any questions anyone might have.
A question from Todd.
Hi, Matt. Thanks very much for explaining the contributing entities contribution. I had a question with respect to appliance standards. So I understand the way you did the code. You looked at what the improvement was per version change and then applied that going forward. If I'm following what you did on the standards, you looked at, I'll say, sort of the standards in play across the 32 product categories. And your chart showed sort of improvement savings, I think, starting as late as 2030. But there was nothing beyond 2030 in terms of new standards. Is that correct?
That is correct. And great question. We limited the scope of this analysis to only those standards that had a final rule published. Okay. So anything beyond whatever the latest standard that met that requirement was included.
And would you say that's conservative to the extent that it doesn't reflect stuff that's potentially going to come up in the 2030 to 2040 period?
Yeah, I think so. And you're jumping ahead a little bit to one of my discussion points, but okay. I think that's likely. To some extent, new federal standards could cannibalize some of the energy efficiency potential. But, there's two concerns with that. A lot of times, standards target things that are difficult to pursue with energy efficiency programs, like, consumer electronics and things like that, where it can be, a windfall, substantial, of savings for those types of devices, especially where plug loads are a sizable share of both the residential and commercial sectors. So there may be gaps in the identified potential that essentially it's just additive. And the other part of that, I think, is we typically assume that and this assumption doesn't hold for all product classes or technologies, but we typically make an overarching assumption that the efficient case continues to advance along with with the baselines. It's kind of proven out through history. That you could certainly make the argument that some categories, like, that's not the case. We could say that for up to a point for something like attic insulation. It's not particularly relevant here, but some of those do diminish over time. But I think there are still a lot of places where that is true, and those incremental savings above standards will still persist. So you could. It's not entirely duplicative, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, no, thank you. And if it sounds like you'll cover that a bit more detail later on in the discussion.
Peter?
Howdy, I've got two questions. First, a couple slides ago, the energy savings per dollar invested. I didn't catch the conclusion there. On that slide, I saw the budgets that were there. Was there a conclusion drawn about the actual, $1 invested results in X dollars saved here?
Yeah. It's in the report. It was extremely high. It was something like $8 per kilowatt hour saved, which is sizable. And I think that's why you see these pretty significant budget numbers, but compared to the other contributing entities, compared to standards at least, you're seeing relatively modest impacts of the weatherization assistance program. So that's it's certainly an assumption that could be revisited with better data, but based on what we had available. Again, drawing from the actual expenditures data, the number of homes served, and our best estimate of the average savings per participant, that's about where we landed.
Okay, so is it $1 invested today is $8 of savings over the lifetime of the measure, 20 years or whatever it is?
No, it'd be $8 per first year kilowatt hour saved.
First year. Okay. That's really high, right? Is that like
that's very high.
Okay, that's really exciting. Glad you did this study. One other question.
Sorry.
I'm sorry,
I want to clarify the units. I think what Matt is saying is $8 of investment saves one first-year kilowatt hour, which is pretty expensive as far as energy efficiency goes. Right. First-year kilowatt hour, 20-year life, 20 kilowatt hours for $8 is like 40 cents a kilowatt hour. Right. So it's pretty expensive as far as savings go. I just want to clarify the units and make sure we're on the same page.
Okay, so is it in the full report? It's expressed in actual energy savings per dollar invested. That's what I was trying to get at. $1 invested equals what?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that is established in the report. I don't think we present it as a levelized cost, but you could estimate that given our assumptions about weighted average project lifetime and the savings.
Okay, thanks. The second question, and sorry if you haven't got to this yet, but what assumptions were made in this about Puerto Rico's adopting of building codes? There's been a really intermittent history here of building codes being adopted. Sometimes there's been 8 or 10 years between building code adoptions. What sort of assumptions were made about when, if ever, Puerto Rico will adopt new building codes locally? Or is that not part of this?
No, that is. So here's the a combination, if you will, of both compliance rates and code cycle adoptions. So we assumed that the current code would extend through the 2024 fiscal year 2024, and then a new code would be implemented every every 3 years after that.
Okay, two comments on that. One, that would be great if the building code is adopted every 3 years. That's what Puerto Rico law requires. However, that has not happened. There's no way to look back historically and say that we should predict it'll be adopted every 3 years, because routinely what happens is it politically just gets kind of swatted aside, and another 3 years, another 3 years, another 3 years go by. I just want to mention there's one thing that we found when we were establishing these standards in Missouri, where I'm from, where it was helpful to give some credit to the utility towards compliance with the percentage EERS for building codes being implemented. We found that was helpful to get the utility to be a much more active participant in cheering for building codes to move forward. That's something that I would support here, because it is frustrating to see there's been at least 2 false starts in the 8 years that I've been here. Where building code has been started to revise, and then it all just kind of gets scuttled, and all the energy savings potential doesn't happen. Somehow I would love if a result of this work could be what you're projecting here, that actually every 3 years we could count on a building code being implemented. That'd be great. Okay, thanks, guys.
Yeah, of course.
Any other questions on the contributing entities section? All right, Matt, go ahead with the potential study.
All right, thanks. So moving on to the final item for discussion here is the energy efficiency potential study. I'll quickly go over some high-level notes on the methodology. You can read through the full details in the report. But in the very high-level terms, how we typically approach these studies is we first define the global inputs to the study. Those are things like the avoided costs, retail rates, economic inputs like discount rates, line loss factors, energy sales forecasts, et cetera. And on that last point, and I'll get into this a little bit more later, we typically use what we call a top-down analysis approach. And without getting too much detail or getting ahead of myself, what that requires is disaggregating that forecast into building types and end uses. So we essentially develop an estimate of end use energy within each building type in the analysis, and those serve as the pools of energy, if you will, that you could potentially save against with energy efficiency measures. And that brings us to the next point, is actually characterizing those measures. Lots of various assumptions and studies go into building those, but essentially it boils down to some estimate of a percent savings you can achieve against those pools of end-use energy at some cost per unit energy saved, and some lifetime that you can expect that those savings will persist. We looked at several scenarios in this study. We developed technical potential mainly as a springboard to the economic potential. I think if I don't get into this later, I'll mention what these actually mean in a little more detail. But we also considered maximum achievable potential and a program achievable scenario, and I do know that we get into some of those details in a minute. This study, was a overall piece of the whole project, in that we leveraged the site visits to characterize that building stock. As I mentioned, we one of the main inputs from that baseline study was the sales disaggregation. That was informed by the surveys and the on-sites. We also used the findings from the in-depth interviews to inform, practices for market-driven measures. Those are things like new construction, equipment replacements or renovations, things where somebody was taking an action anyway. We were able to, essentially use those to inform some initial adoption of those kinds of practices. We also used the avoided cost study developed by Synapse for the avoided costs that fed into our cost effectiveness analysis using the Puerto Rico cost test. This study needed to be supported by secondary research because even though we had a wealth of information from the primary data collection, there were still significant gaps around the both the market and the opportunities. So what we were trying to do, as I kind of outlined at the beginning here, is just understand the total amount of efficiency available from EE programs. This is hopefully useful in informing program design. By pointing to the end uses and technologies with the greatest potential. Taking a top-down approach, we don't necessarily characterize every widget out there. A lot of things are characterized in aggregate, especially where we might not have incredibly granular data across all building types. But we ultimately, used the best information available to inform, the total costs and benefits associated with pursuing that efficiency. And a few, I guess, disclaimers. The study wasn't intended to give detailed program designs or develop program plans. It's usually a separate exercise from conducting a potential study, which are typically done at a higher level. We weren't trying to quantify, a specific number of measures likely to be installed in future years. Again, we're working with, top-down estimates of savings potential, coupled with bottom-up characterizations of those measure opportunities. So we're mainly looking at shares of energy savings, if you will, as opposed to like, kWh saved per unit installed, like you might see with through a program planning exercise. We also sought to determine which programs could eliminate market barriers to efficiency, and finally determine opportunities available in certain building types. A few more notes on methods. We modeled 152 discrete measure opportunities. Again, we incorporated market data to the extent we could from the baseline study, but also supplemented that with secondary studies. One key thing here is that we were developing this study in the absence of any established savings estimation protocols. So in most cases, we leveraged technical reference manuals. And those are essentially the guidelines or the standard protocols, if you will, for quantifying measure savings given certain site-specific inputs or sometimes just per unit savings. But we also supplemented that with other case studies, meta-analyses, other data, for instance, data from the industrial assessment centers to quantify the opportunities in the industrial. And, Puerto Rico's, specific market conditions and, specific climate where necessary. We looked at 18 building types over residential and C&I. And our, as I mentioned, the primary cost test here was the Puerto Rico benefit cost test. And that, I guess, in a nutshell, includes avoided energy generation and capacity costs, avoided transmission and distribution costs, but also includes among the benefits avoided greenhouse gas emissions, non-energy resource benefits, such as health and safety improvements, improved occupant comfort, water savings, and those kinds of things. And on the cost side, we were looking at the incremental cost of the efficiency measures, as well, and cases where we're in the achievable cases, we're also including, or in contrast, I guess, including the incentive budgets and non-incentive budgets as part of those costs. Here's a high-level look at the results. This figure shows the forecasted energy consumption under each scenario, economic maximum achievable and the program achievable. So this dotted black line here represents the unadjusted sales forecast through the analysis period as provided by Luma via data request. And then the economic potential is showing the most reductions. This is a bit misleading because it doesn't go to zero, but 6,000 gigawatt hours at the base here. Between the economic and the program achievable potential, we have the maximum achievable potential, and then the program achievable potential, reducing the consumption in 2040 by the least amount there. In 2040, the economic potential contributes 21.8% toward that 30% goal. Under the max achievable and program achievable scenarios, those cumulative savings amount to 15.8% and 11.2% respectively. Cumulative annual energy savings. This table presents by scenario, sector, and year. The cumulative savings for each scenario. So we're showing the 3 years and or the next triennium, if you will, and then also the final year of the analysis period. And what these represent are the savings persisting in that year. So the savings from everything implemented up to that point that has not yet expired or passed its effective useful life. We can see here, as I mentioned, economic gets to 21.8%, nearly 16 for max achievable, and 11.2 for program. At the end of the first triennium, the cumulative savings for economic, max achievable, and program are 7.5%, 3.5%, and 2.7%, respectively. Moving on to the incremental annual energy savings. There's no specific incremental annual goal tied to that 2040 requirement. But it's useful to see how this is achieved across all scenarios. So in the economic scenario, it starts off as the highest incremental annual in the first year at 2.9% across all sectors, dropping to 2.1%. Max achievable starts out at 1.2%. Before rising to 1.9% over the middle of the analysis period, and then dropping to 1.7%. And then the program achievable follows a similar trajectory, but starts out a bit lower and doesn't max out as highly, starting at 1%, getting up to about 1.5% before tailing off to 1.3% at the end of the analysis period. And one thing probably to highlight in all of this, one is that our economic potential, we need to assume some sort of adoption curve, if you will. For economic, we're really looking at all cost-effective potential according to the Puerto Rico cost test. essentially if it has a, BCR of greater than 1, we include it in the portfolio. And we spread that somewhat evenly over the analysis period. And we do that for a number of reasons. It's just more useful in comparison to some of the achievable scenarios when you do that, as opposed to looking at it as kind of a snapshot in time, as is sometimes done. But also it allows some of those potentially less expensive market-driven opportunities to enter the portfolio, whereas just looking at what you could achieve today, you'd be assuming a lot of that, the vast majority is going to happen as time discretionary retrofits, which can kind of skew your overall portfolio findings. Another thing worth mentioning here is that the incremental annual savings in all cases kind of are lower at the or fall from a higher level that they achieve over the course of the analysis period. And I think the primary contributor there is that the baseline sales forecast, which is what we're using to assess the potential, it falls substantially over this period. If I can go back a couple slides, yeah, this dotted line is without embedded efficiency, and it's has a fairly substantial reduction from about 15,000 gigawatt hours down to just north of 11,000. So it's a big drop, and as that falls, essentially you have less energy to save against, if you will, because these percentages are all relative to the 2019 baseline year. And this is, again, skipping ahead to another discussion item at the end here, but that's worth keeping in mind when looking at these numbers. Moving on to the cost effectiveness results. This table summarizes the benefits, costs, net benefits, and the benefit cost ratio according to the Puerto Rico benefit cost test. For each scenario here, the net benefits as defined here are the benefits less the costs. All the values here are in present value 2026 dollars, in millions of dollars. And these represent the total costs and benefits for operating the entire portfolio, if you will, over the entire analysis period. So this is the cumulative present value benefits for all activities over the 15 years of the analysis period. So we see that in all scenarios, the BCRs comfortably exceed 1.0, and pursuing the maximum achievable potential, for instance, would yield like $1.8 billion in net benefits for activities over those 15 years. One note about the BCRs is in the economic potential, we essentially are looking at what efficiency measures or actions kind of pass that financial screenings on their own merit. So it's like, if something is cost effective, we assume it happens. So it's, purely a result of that, binary cost test. So we don't assume there's any program activity in that scenario. So there's no associated non-incentive costs that would be in your bucket of costs here. And I just mentioned that because in contrast to the maximum achievable and program achievable, well, particularly the maximum achievable, there, we're assuming that there is a supporting program and it's paying 100% of incremental costs through incentives. And there we see, because of those impacts, a reduced BCR of 2.0 relative to that economic potential. And then moving on to the achievable potential, that BCR is a little higher because in the program achievable scenario, we're assuming that incentives are available to cover 50% of incremental costs as opposed to 100%. It's kind of a sensitivity analysis on the potential based on financial incentives. We assume that in all cases in the low-income segments that 100% cost coverage is still offered. But there we see the benefit cost ratios go up because one impact of reducing those incentives is that paybacks get longer for measures when there's not a bigger financial incentive there to help offset some of those incremental costs. And those falling paybacks directly impact the adoption of a given measure. So what we see is the more costly, lower BCR measures tend to fall off first, and that causes an overall portfolio to be more cost effective. Digging a little bit deeper into the benefits distribution and exactly what's feeding into those numbers. This figure here shows, by scenario, there's a cluster of columns for each scenario, economic, max achievable, and program on the right here. And each stacked column represents a specific analysis sector, so residential on the left and C&I on the right. And what I can quickly point out here is that the vast majority of benefits across all scenarios is generated by avoided energy generation benefits. That's these orange sections of the columns. Depending on the sector and scenario, those range from between 65 to 67% of total benefits. The next largest contributor to the overall benefits are the non-energy impacts. These, as I mentioned earlier, can include things like health and safety benefits or increased productivity or increased comfort. And they represent about 18% of total benefits and are represented by these light blue sections of the column. Avoided generation capacity contributes about 12% of the total benefits. It's the dark section on the bottom of the columns here. And then finally, the green sections are the avoided greenhouse gas benefits. Yeah, I see a couple of questions. PJ? I think you're on mute if you're talking.
I think PJ may have just had his hand left up.
Oh.
Or Graziella has her hand up.
Hi there. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Thank you. So I know that government buildings are also a contributing entity in the regulation, but I didn't see the results from government buildings in this presentation. I haven't done the results of the paper in detail yet.
Oh, sorry, you were breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, I'm asking about the potential from government buildings and whether that's included in analysis. I know that's a contributing entity as well for the regulation.
Yeah. So, government buildings and efficiency kind of spurred by mandates, that's something we investigated, but ultimately couldn't come up with a defensible estimate of what's been achieved there. And I guess the other side of that is we weren't able to separate government buildings out as a specific segment of the EE potential. I think it's our thinking, and this is what we've seen in other places with these kinds of mandates, that savings there could likely contribute to utility targets, because it's likely that those government buildings wouldn't be precluded from participating in your programs. Again, I don't know if this is the case, but I'm just speaking from how this stuff is handled, and it's kind of viewed as a kind of win-win, where there's financial and programmatic support via utility programs to help satisfy those mandates, and then you have a willing participant, if you will, to try to go after those savings. So we haven't, to answer your question, we haven't quantified that impact. I did put together kind of a back of the envelope calculation of what that might represent if the earlier targets, the earlier annual targets, there were separate targets for legislative and judicial and executive facilities, with kind of a percentage per year that was supposed to be achieved, but those were ultimately rolled into this overall 30% target. But I do, if it would be useful, I do have, again, it was a very high level estimate, because I don't have a perfect number for energy consumption by those facilities. But I could share that if it's useful.
Sorry, clarifying question for that. So the potential here reflects, it integrates government.
Yeah. Government buildings were excluded from the. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I understand. So it's embedded in the results. It's just not pulled out as a specific area. Thank you.
Yeah. Kenji?
Hey, Matt. Thanks.
Hello.
Great. Yeah, thanks so much for your presentation. Just to confirm, is T&D avoided costs not included in this BCA analysis?
They were not included. I think, I'm sure you know, the avoided cost study didn't quantify that. I don't know if there have been subsequent efforts to quantify T&D avoided costs. I guess I'll just leave that there. Has there been development on that front?
So this is Asa Hopkins from Synapse. There has not been development on that front. The general thought has been, because the grid is in such a state of needing to be rebuilt and repaired in a wholesale manner anyway, that the incremental impact of having slightly less electricity or slightly more electricity go across that whole network has it's hard, both very hard and likely to be very small to quantify what the actual potential value of that would be.
Right. Yeah, that was exactly my thinking, because the way I've seen it characterized in other avoided cost studies, right, is you identify the planned transmission and distribution investments, and you have to figure out, what portion of that was for increased demand versus, regular maintenance and upkeep. And I could see that being a very difficult thing to do with any accuracy. But no, Kenji, that was not included.
Yeah, thank you.
Matt, I'm glad to see there's a value there for non-energy impacts, and if I recall correctly, I don't believe that the Synapse study necessarily quantified those or identified those, and you listed those. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to those numbers and how those were expressed in terms of, is it dollars per kWh or what did you come up with?
Yeah, it's actually implemented as a simple blanket multiplier of 15%. on top of energy and capacity benefits.
Okay.
You know, we don't have a study that, you know, itemizes those. There have been attempts elsewhere, but you know, that's a fairly common practice, just to simplify this to a negotiated adder, if you will, in a lot of benefit cost tests. 15%, you know, values ranging from 5 to 15%, and you know, being applied to different components of the avoided energy or capacity costs. But that's where that number came from.
Okay, so sort of akin to what had previously been done for, say, you know, societal benefit, just add 10% to the numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right, and that was an adder to the capacity and energy savings, energy benefits.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. Moving on to some insights on budgets. We're showing here by sector, and then overall the modeled budgets associated with the maximum achievable potential. And these are probably certainly very large, or look very large. You know, again, just a reminder that the assumption here is that incentives are available to cover 100% of incremental costs for any implemented measures, because we're trying to characterize, you know, what's the maximum that could be achieved, assuming like idealized program design. So, you know, I think history has shown that, you know, programs have gotten close to at least estimates of maximum achievable potential, offering far less than 100% incremental cost coverage. But that's just the convention here for this scenario. So in summary, we're showing here, you know, estimated incentive as well as non-incentive budgets. Those non-incentive budgets would cover things like, you know, program administration, marketing, evaluation, potentially technical assistance, education and outreach, those kinds of activities. Anything that's not a direct financial incentive, or something, you know, similar to an incentive. So all told, the modeled budgets in FY 2026 were about $96 million, increasing to $247 million at the end of the analysis period. And on average, those non-incentive costs were modeled at about between 20 and 25% of total budgets. And then on the program achievable potential, this is, you know, again, where we assumed 50% incentive coverage of incremental costs, except for the case of low-income participants, where we maintain that 100% cost coverage assumption. The budgets are far less in this case, you know, owing to the fact that you're paying less in financial incentives, but also because it, you know, achieves less savings than the maximum achievable. And in this case, the budgets go from $43 million annually up to just under $97 million. Moving on to a little bit of insight into what's in the potential. The first chart here kind of shows across building types in the residential sector where the potential is or was identified. Here we're showing, you know, the cumulative annual savings at the end of each of the modeled triennia. You know, the majority of the potential is in single family homes. This is probably not a shock. It's aligned with you know, demographics or the building stock. The next highest contributor is multifamily, market rate multifamily, you know, followed by single family low income, and then finally multifamily low income. Looking at that same data, but across end uses, the potential here, that jumps out is this big orange segment of cooling efficiency potential. And again, if you recall that Sankey diagram I showed early on, it's aligned with the biggest consumption being in that cooling end use, and we're seeing our savings potential is also kind of correlated there. After cooling, we see water heating and plug loads as being substantial savers. Even though we modeled fairly modest overall water heating sales, there's still some remaining potential to be achieved there through high efficiency water heaters, solar water heaters, faucet aerators, and so on. Whole building opportunities are worth pointing out here. This light green segment, the column chart, represents kind of what we call whole building opportunities, where it's not easy to disaggregate where those savings are actually coming from. These are primarily modeled as home energy reports or a residential behavioral program, and you can kind of see here that it starts off as a pretty significant portion of the savings on a cumulative basis, at least at the end of the first triennium. But over time, it becomes fairly small in cumulative terms, and that's because it's assumed to have a 1-year measure life. So while it contributes a decent chunk of incremental annual savings, the impacts on the cumulative savings, especially near the end of the analysis period, are much more modest. Looking at some of the top measures, these two charts show the cumulative annual energy savings by measure. Again, on a cumulative annual basis, early in the period. There's two columns here, one showing cumulative annual at the end of the first triennium, that's 2028, and then at the end of the last, or 2040. And we see home energy reports as being the biggest contributor in 2028, but much smaller at the end for those reasons I mentioned in the last slide. After that, next biggest are high efficiency ductless mini split ACs. I think it's probably worth mentioning while there was pretty high, reasonably high average existing efficiency of these units as identified with the baseline study, there's still a lot of headroom in the market for units that far exceed both standards requirements and existing average efficiency. So that's a big contributor to the potential. Next is advanced power strips. Acting on that big share of plug loads, followed by refrigerator and freezer recycling. And again, if you recall, that was one thing that was notable from the baseline study findings, just the how common secondary refrigerators and to a lesser extent freezers were. Next, some envelope measures, like Energy Star windows, cooler roofs, in the top 10. Smart thermostats, kind of a lesser contributor, but still important over the total analysis period, followed by solar hot water and Energy Star refrigerators, so just more efficient refrigerators as opposed to recycling, and then Energy Star ceiling fans, given the high use of ceiling fans for cooling needs. The right here shows the demand reductions associated with, different sorted list, but a lot of the same common measures here. High efficiency ductless mini split ACs, very high in the rankings here. Other measures contributing heavily, home energy reports, advanced power strips, and a lot of similar measures to those over on the left. Yeah, is there a question?
Yeah, on the previous slide, I'm curious on because we have mentioned that for building envelope, AC was limited. How are these? How did these two become significant savings if AC was limited?
AC was limited in terms of the share of floor space cooled. But that was taken into consideration in the building energy modeling that fed into the sales disaggregation. So we see a big opportunity here, particularly for units like ductless mini splits that are primarily best deployed to provide that kind of single room or conveniently provide that single room cooling, especially with predominantly concrete construction. So there's a lot of baseline ductless mini split AC systems identified through the baseline study, and those are I think a great opportunity for one-for-one replacements. Yes, Nicole.
Hi, Nicole Sage here, Resource Innovations. Question about the potential for smart thermostats. Matt, could you touch on the data that's driving the recommendation around smart thermostats? I'll say from our experience in the downstream rebates and even in the retail offerings for the programs, just the prevalence of smart thermostats is relatively low, especially that tied to the ductless systems. And again, overall, it seemed like the potential was low, but I'm just wondering what sort of primary data collection you have on the smart thermostat piece, because that's been one for us that's been difficult to put our finger on, honestly.
Yeah, it's definitely difficult given the system types we encountered. These are, I think, certainly more commonly deployed for more central systems. So I mean, the data we have is that outside of whatever controls are built into the mainly ductless mini splits that are out there, there's not a lot of thermostat controls, and I think what we see is an opportunity for either integrated controls in new ductless mini splits primarily, or third party or aftermarket add-ons, which can communicate with some of the newer ductless AC systems, so can provide kind of smart thermostat capabilities with systems that conventionally have not been easily integrated with those. So moving on here to C&I. Again, similar to the res sector, this is breaking out the max achievable potential based on cumulative annual energy savings. Here we're seeing it by building type. In contrast to the residential sector, just given the heterogeneity of this market, the opportunity is a lot more distributed, versus mostly in single family and residential. So across the segments, biggest opportunities were found in industrial, even though the industrial sector is fairly small, I guess, in terms of the whole, like around, I think 10% of total sales or thereabouts, still a major contributor of potential. Other major segments being restaurants, food sales or grocery stores, and retail buildings as being key market opportunities. And this correlates pretty well with those building types that are, modeled to have higher cooling and I guess to a lesser extent ventilation loads. Looking across end uses, CNI or on CNI, like on residential, these green bars here are the space cooling opportunities. So the single biggest contributor to overall savings. Next is, I guess I would tackle these both together, a combination of interior and exterior lighting, these light blue and purple bars. And as we saw in the baseline study findings, even though, interior lighting is, not yet completely saturated with LEDs, it's moving in that direction. Exterior lighting less so. Saw more opportunities for retrofits there. But still, a sizable opportunity for savings because, when you look at things in terms of a per fixture count basis, it kind of sometimes obscures the opportunity because, if you assume LED lighting is, twice as efficient as baseline technologies, just, as a rough approximation, when you think about those, fixture count metrics, there's actually a lot more energy to be saved than that might suggest. So we're still modeling those to be fairly big opportunities into the future. And then beyond that, some of those industrial end uses such as process loads, improvements to machine drives, and those kinds of opportunities are pretty sizable contributors to the overall potential. Largely a lot of things that would come through custom programs in practice. Moving on to the cumulative annual energy savings by measure for CNI, like we had for residential. This kind of tracks with the end-use level breakouts we just saw, but LED lighting, at least in the initial years, of the biggest contributors of savings, in particular exterior area lighting and LED street lighting contributing heavily. Those kind of tail off as we kind of model saturation with LED street lighting by the time we get to the end of the analysis period. Opportunities for advanced lighting controls, also sizable, followed by high efficiency unitary systems, whether more like residential central systems or RTUs. Those are also a big contributor and larger in cumulative terms over the span of the analysis period. Beyond that, some of those industrial end uses, machine drive improvements are high contributors, and then some whole building things like retrocommissioning and chillers. On the peak demand reduction front, one thing's probably perhaps a bit surprising to see, or at least for me, is to see these exterior lighting measures kind of bubble up to high contributors to peak demand savings, but that makes sense when you think that the peak period is between I'm going to forget the exact months, August and November, 8 to 10 p.m. So typically at times that are highly coincident with exterior lighting. So a little counterintuitive, but given the overall energy savings there, in tandem with that overlapping coincidence, we can see some big peak impacts from those measures. Cooling measures coming up in the third position here for peak demand savings, followed by some lighting controls measures and a smattering of others, HVAC and lighting controls. So because one of the key takeaways here is.
Can I just pause you just a second? It looks like you are getting close to wrapping up. I want to be cognizant of the time, and also our friendly interpreter who's been going at it for a while. I think he could go for a little while longer, but if there's going to be an extended discussion period after, we might want to take a break. At which point, maybe it's actually lunch, or alternatively, do we push through? I'm curious your thoughts on how to structure the remainder of the time.
Well, I'm okay pushing through. Yeah, I think I only have like a slide or two left here. So happy to.
Yeah. I would say I also am personally going to have to sign off. Kenji's going to take over facilitating. I'm going to suggest that what happens is that you get through your a couple of slides here, and if there's going to be a discussion period and further, a more extended Q&A, we might take just like a 5-minute rest break before that, just for everybody's benefit. So I guess I'm going to suggest that you wrap this up, then everybody takes like 5 minutes, gather your thoughts, get your questions in order, etc., and come back and do Q&A and discussion for a little bit after that. And I'll let Kenji facilitate that in and out. That work?
Yeah, that sounds good. I will just disclaimer, I have a hard stop at 1 o'clock.
Yeah, I anticipate that will not be a problem. Yeah, just a short break for the interpreter and for everybody to get questions in order so we can do the question discussion period in a timely fashion and get everybody back onto the rest of the day.
Sure.
Okay. Good. Great. Thank you. So I'll as I said, I'm passing the baton to Kenji for facilitating.
Thanks, Asa. And so should I close out the slides first before?
Yeah, you finish the substantive bit before we take a break, and then do the questions and discussion after.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, as I mentioned, I think I only have 2 slides left here after this. So a key takeaway here is, what does this all mean together? So this table is kind of the summary of that. What are these totals when you combine the model energy efficiency potential with the contributing entities? And what we see here is that, the economic potential exceeds that 32.5% or 30% target, meeting 32.5% in 2040. But the two modeled achievable scenarios are falling a bit shy of it. Max achievable getting to 26.5% and program to 21.8%. And just a few notes around that, specifically around the challenges in meeting that target. I would advise, as I would with all potential studies, is that, the failure of the modeled achievable potential to satisfy the 30% reduction doesn't necessarily mean the goal is impossible. This is a potential study. There's a lot of assumptions baked into it. We're working with incomplete information and secondary information. And a lot of this has ultimately been, untested in Puerto Rico, as far as, running full-fledged efficiency programs for any long period of time. So there's a lot of unknowns about, any number of things from, what are the remaining gaps in the building stock. So I think, I would caveat the results of our own study to say that, we acknowledge that, there is uncertainty, especially looking out 15 years. A few keynotes is that, custom commercial and industrial measures may play a larger role than they're kind of modeled in this analysis. I mean, we've taken a conservative tack given the information that we have available to us on what those could contribute to the overall potential. But as more, site-specific information becomes available over time, as more program experience is gained, that picture might become clearer. I'd also note that the Puerto Rico cost test, as it's implemented in this study, screens out measures at the measure level a lot of places, that's implemented as either a program level requirement or a portfolio level requirement. So there is additional potential depending on how that test is viewed. That doesn't mean it's easy to get. If it's falling out according to the cost test, it's likely it doesn't carry as much benefits, so it might be a harder opportunity to get at, or at least an expensive one from a program standpoint. But that's also worth mentioning. And then this third point, and I'll just briefly mention it because we kind of talked through everything I had thought about earlier, is that new codes and standards beyond those that were assessed as part of the contributing entities analysis, they might not entirely offset any of the modeled EE potential. They could be additive depending on what they're covering. And it's, very uncertain what those might look like in the future. We have schedules for when certain product categories are due for rulemaking processes. But one, those schedules are typically not adhered to, and two, you don't know what the final outcome is going to be. But that's certainly something that needs to be kept in mind here too. I've already mentioned the impact of a declining baseline forecast. I think that certainly acts against satisfying that 2019 requirement. It would be an easier target if the sales forecast were increasing significantly. Essentially, there's be more energy to save against versus that static baseline year. So that's another thing to take into consideration. And then there's dubbing it the efficiency paradox for Puerto Rico, right? There's high electric rates, but low per household, per business consumption. So while the high rates might make you think you're going to have a lot of participant benefits, that baseline low consumption kind of offsets that to some degree. So a lot of those measures that where we look at simple payback as kind of a measure of what's going to get adopted, those kind of play against each other. Another thing to note is the modeled lighting assumptions in the study. We still assume that C&I lighting would be an eligible opportunity, but it's worth cautioning here that as that market transforms or continues to transform, there is the risk of increased free ridership, and that should be taken into consideration. Especially in the latter years of this analysis period, or at least a little bit further out from the beginning. Kind of talked about the home energy reports and the incremental annual savings. I would also just say that's kind of an unproven approach in Puerto Rico. I think it probably needs to be proven out what those savings might look like under that program, given the low per household consumption that we just talked about, and the high rates. High rates might have already spurred people to take their own actions to reduce discretionary loads. But given the success of those programs, many places, it's certainly worth considering or piloting something there. And then finally, just one other point on the new construction. Might think that would be a pretty big contributor to savings, but given the new construction forecasts we were working with, given economic impacts and people moving off the island, that's kind of a fairly limited impact, and I just raised that because a lot of the savings that you might get from more whole building design type approaches and super efficient envelopes and passive cooling strategies and things like that, they just don't bubble up too much, given the new construction activity that's modeled. And I'll close out here quickly to give everyone a break with three quick recommendations. One is that we recommend developing a reporting and attribution framework. Given these contributing entities and some of the uncertainty associated with the estimates for each of them. There should be some process to periodically review, what they're actually contributing as the reporting on those things gets better over time. This might involve, tracking appliance purchases so that, standards attribution, savings attribution can be properly accounted for. Doing energy code compliance surveys, and again, maybe in support of improved code compliance programs implemented by the utility. And then government-led initiatives, following up on any of those mandates, how they're being implemented, and what resources are being used to support them. Having a cohesive framework that is taking all of this into consideration is going to be critical when there's so many things that can contribute to the targets. Second recommendation is to standardize savings assumptions. As I mentioned, we were working with a lot of secondary sources, given that there's, at the time we were doing most of the analysis, no comprehensive technical reference manual for Puerto Rico efficiency programs. So, getting some standard assumptions around those and building up some, expectations for planning purposes, is a key assumption or a key recommendation going forward that would, help both, program implementation, but also future assessments of potential where those assessments and, the guidelines for claiming savings could be aligned. And finally, recommendation 3, again, I've alluded to this a couple times, but, the Puerto Rico market's a bit untested as far as, a lot of efficiency programs are concerned. And getting a better sense of both, program participant and non-participant views via surveys to help design future programs is another key recommendation. And, potentially conducting some Puerto Rico specific willingness to pay surveys. We were using secondary sources for that as well, based on some data that we thought was, socioeconomically transferable, given the efficiency market for Puerto Rico. But, it's hard to know what's accurate when you don't have any primary data. So some research in that vein would be very useful for ongoing work. And with that, I think I'm through my content. Thank you all for your attention. Appreciate it.
Hey, great. Thanks so much, Matt. We are very glad to see the results of this study. I think it took about 2 years. It was a huge undertaking, and you have faced some challenges, while conducting survey or internal staff constraints and so on. But I'm very glad to see this. Yeah.
Thanks, Keiji.
So we are taking a 5 minutes break, and then I'll take questions from the audience. So so I'll take our time 5 minutes and come back.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, folks. It's 5 minutes past. Hey, Matt, are you ready?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. So yeah, we can. Yeah, you have time until 1 o'clock. So we have plenty of time for further questions, if anybody has.
Hello.
Hi.
Yes, I have.
Oh. Gerardo?
Yes, yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon to all. Gerardo Cosme from the Independent Consumer Protection Office. I have a question regarding the study. This study is this presentation is for the final report of that study?
I think that's our intent, barring any, substantive feedback that would greatly change our conclusions.
Okay, and when this study is going to be published? Because in the resolution, it was stated that it was going to be provided for the audience before this workshop.
It was my understanding that it was distributed to the participant list of this meeting via email, but I did not personally send that out. But it should be available.
My question is when it's going to be available?
It should be available now, Kenji. I don't know if you can provide additional guidance there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I have to follow up with Asa, and because I haven't seen the report myself, so I'll double check. And so yeah, as Matt said, it's available, but I'll make sure that it is distributed to the public. Yeah.
Okay. I ask this because in the resolution order, it was stated that we had a comment period for the report for October 10, and because due to at least I didn't have a chance to see the report prior to this workshop. It's going to take me some time to dig out and the report to make comments or questions regarding to it. So my recommendation is to take that to the Energy Bureau to see if they can allow more time for the comments period.
Right. So October. So we are taking comments from the stakeholder and in writing or by email, and that is due Friday, October 10th.
Yeah, but that's a short time period if we didn't have the report, and also if there will be any contact or email that we can forward questions regarding the study prior to submitting the comments.
Right to the comments. So the comments is supposed to be sent to the Bureau, Energy Bureau. So you're saying you wanna, before the comments, you wanna reach out to the Energy Bureau?
Well, yes, to clarify, to have clarifying questions or regarding the study. That was the intention, I guess, to have the report prior to this meeting. Now that at least I don't know the rest of the people here, but I didn't have access to that report, so I'm sure I will have questions that may be clarified easily by email.
Yeah, sure.
That question.
Yeah, you can send any questions you have. during the next 2 weeks before by October 10th.
Yeah, where? To who? To who are you going to address that questions?
I think yeah, we'll send out the contact and email.
Okay.
Where you can use. Yep. Thank you.
Thanks.
Next, Graziella. Go ahead.
Hello. Hi. Thank you for today's presentation, and thanks to the Energy Bureau, and thanks, Matt, for all the work on this valuable analysis. We look forward to digging into the data. For the appendices that were referenced in the report, we had trouble opening those. So I don't know if you guys could send out those appendices, attachments. I don't know if anybody else had issues with that. Second, will you guys be sending out this presentation as well? It's really helpful. We would love to have a copy of it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
You guys will be able to send out the appendices, the attachments that were, I think it was supposed to be a link to attachments.
Yeah, I have no problem sending them out directly. Admittedly, it's my. Were you working with the PDF document?
Yes.
And were you able to see them in like the attachments pane? I'm admittedly new to attaching things to PDFs, so it might be.
Yeah. Oh, and I may be new to opening attachment in the attachments page.
Yeah, because there's the little icons at the end in the appendix, so that if you're looking at a Word version, those are just embedded documents. But the PDF, my understanding is you can't do that, and they're just attached to the document. So if you're able to navigate to the attachments pane, that might work for you. But if not, I'm happy to distribute them separately.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I can open this. All right, I'll look into that. We'll follow up if we're not able to open them. And then the last question I had was, I know you just wrapped up this one, but these studies are updated regularly. Has the Energy Bureau decided on a sort of a schedule for the next update?
I don't know myself the schedule, and anybody from the Energy Bureau have this information? Okay, so yeah, I think we'll get back to you on this. Yeah. Okay, yeah, we have anybody else? Please raise your hands. Todd, go ahead.
Hi, Matt. Thanks for explaining, and thanks for all the hard work. I know these things are not necessarily easy to do. So kudos to you and your team.
Thanks.
I wanted to ask about in the avoided costs, where I asked about the program, the non-energy benefits. We saw the water savings at the top. There was no mention of fossil fuel savings, even though some of the end uses, I think primarily water heating, do have a fossil fuel source. So I just wondered if that was just de minimis in your analysis or was not considered in your analysis.
It was not considered, and we didn't explicitly target any measures that would save solely delivered fuels. I think early on in our measure list, we did have some assumption of appliances with secondary fossil impacts. So if you had a clothes washer, for instance, that was served by propane water heating, but we ultimately didn't model those benefits. So no, that they are not included. Okay,
so there's potentially kind of a secondary, tertiary effect that was not modeled.
Yes.
Okay, and Graciela asked about the appendices, which obviously everyone's keen to get a look at. Will those appendices show the measures that did not pass the benefit cost test?
Good question. I don't believe any of them do, but I'd be happy to provide that separately.
I think it would be helpful if you could, Matt. I think you mentioned you looked at 152 measures, I believe, and I'm assuming that some of those did not pass. And I just think it would be helpful to see that complete list. And if I understand your methodology, there's no savings potential calculated for those because if they did not pass the economic, you wouldn't have included them.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. Great. Thanks, Doug. Okay. Anybody else have questions?
Hi, Nicole here with Resource Innovations. I was taking a look at one of the discussion topics of the efficiency paradox, this idea of high rates and low consumption. And I couldn't help but think about, and in Tom's comments here, I couldn't help but think about customer bill savings. And while consumption may, yes, be low, but with high rates, right, those can be very, very impactful and valuable to customers, especially those with, high energy burden, et cetera. I'm just wondering if those savings are taken into account as benefits in any of these tests, Matt.
Not explicitly in the primary test, the Puerto Rico cost or benefit cost test. And I mean, the way the retail savings or bill savings flow through the analysis are they're used in the calculation of simple paybacks at the measure level, which we use in concert with willingness to pay data to figure out what the maximum adoption of the measure is, given the what it looks like from the customer's perspective. But beyond that, we didn't. We could run the participant cost test or something like that, where those benefits are considered, but we did not.
And is the Puerto Rico cost test, is that published yet?
Yes. Yeah, I think it was published, I'd say 3 years ago. I can dig up the order, if that'd be helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, it was published in 2022. Okay, so Todd, do you still have questions?
Yes, I do. I have one follow-on to Nicole's question and Matt's response.
Yeah, go ahead.
Matt, if I understand correctly, the retail impact, the customer bill impact, is going to be reflected through the customer payback, and presumably there's some sort of payback acceptance curve that's baked into the modeling, right?
Mhm.
Was there any adjustment at all of a payback acceptance curve, say from the mainland to Puerto Rico? I'm not sure if there's any difference or not, but I just wondered if there was any kind of adjustment or consideration there of like local circumstances, so to speak.
Yeah, we didn't explicitly adjust that data. We used data that was part of a study we conducted for New Orleans, Entergy New Orleans.
Right, the NOLA study.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And that study included a Delphi panel approach to establish willingness to pay curves. And as I think we maybe briefly outlined in the report, we kind of discussed some of the similarities, between New Orleans and Puerto Rico, somewhat nascent energy efficiency programs, not to the extent Puerto Rico has, but large low-income populations, commonality of natural disasters. So we did use that research wholesale without any adjustment.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks, Todd. Anybody else? Now, can I ask one question?
Sure.
I'm curious, what were the most difficult things you come across? And do you have any solutions to overcome those in the next, if you're going to do it again?
Huh. As part of conducting the study?
Yeah. Surveys?
I mean, I guess, dealing with incomplete information. I think one of the hurdles we bumped up against was just, trying to find data that, should be available, at least it appears it should be, and not being able to find it. So, and I can't say for certainty whether that data exists or not. And if it does, I would love to see it, to inform, future iterations of this study or, program implementation. That was certainly one thing. Another thing is that, we're, it's more of a personal thing, but I'm not used to conducting a study like this where, it's so different. From I'm often on the other side, and when certain jurisdictions say, oh, we're different, and we can't do this, or whatever it is, we're always saying like, well, no, you're not. It's like efficiency is efficiency. People want to save money, but it's I think it was true to some extent in this case, just because we were working with limited data. Right. At least at the outset, and that improved over the course of the study. But still, I would freely admit there's a lot of gaps remaining in terms of our knowledge of the building stocks and customer attitudes toward efficiency, and then just modeling a program that's right at that cusp of having to dig deeper and go after these long-term targets. It was certainly a challenge there, and I guess the trifecta is doing it at a time when commercial lighting savings, which has been this pillar of electric efficiency programs for, 10 years about, kind of dwindling and is more uncertain now than in the past. And we've been talking about this transition forever, and I think it's finally starting to take hold a little bit. That programs are moving past commercial lighting, and they look a lot different. They transition towards decarbonization. They just accept smaller impacts and higher budgets. But it's that transition that kind of calls into question a lot of the industry experience around efficiency programs that have been built up for so long. When you've got this abundant, cheap opportunity to kind of prop up going after opportunities, deeper opportunities elsewhere. Solutions. I get more data collection, more pilots, more experience, more studies. I hate to say, but just more information, and I think a lot of that will come organically. But if there's opportunities for targeted research, I think that could be really helpful.
There's a huge room for improvements in terms of collecting the data. Right, we may have to find a way, invent a new approach to get more data. So it seems like this is really one of the most interesting studies you have ever done, I guess.
Yeah, you could say that.
Yeah. Great, thanks. Yeah. And does anybody else have questions, further questions? Okay. I think we are all set for now. So thank you so much for everybody for attending this webinar. And huge shout out again to ND5 team. Thanks so much for your work. So we are again collecting comments, feedback from all the stakeholders, and we'll send out the email address where you can send your comments. And the comments is due Friday, October 10th. Right. And
this is Commissioner Torres. I just want to say in the resolution, it gives the address and to who write the comments to in the resolution that we sent out.
Okay. Yeah.
For the stakeholders meeting. So yeah.
Yes, I got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, that's for the comments, to send the comments. I saw that, but to make questions regarding the study, because I didn't have the opportunity to see it prior to this workshop. There could be any email that I can send questions regarding this study prior to make the comments.
Sure.
Or later than that, because I didn't have the chance to be prepared for questions today.
Right. Yeah, understood. Yeah. Yeah, definitely you can send your any question, clarifying questions to the email that we're gonna send you to share with you. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Gracias.
And if another workshop is needed, just file a motion and requesting that workshop, if anything. So we'll take it into consideration.
Another workshop for after
everyone, because we are aware that everyone received the report yesterday. We sent it out yesterday, so they didn't have much time to analyze the whole thing. So yeah, if another workshop is needed, just make the request to the Energy Bureau, and we'll take it into consideration.
Right. Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I'll let the ASA know about that request. Yeah. Thank you for your comment, Antonio.
We done?
Yeah, looks like it, right? Are we done, Matt?
On behalf of the
I
Energy
think so.
Bureau, thanks all the stakeholders and thanks for CNOPS and NV5 for doing this presentation.
Thank you.
Okay, and NV5, can you send us a copy of the presentation so we could share with the stakeholders?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, perfect.
Great.
And if I'm repeating anything that was already spoken, I apologize.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks so much, everybody, and Matt,
Thanks.
and NV5 team. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.